Hello, friends. My name is Monty Paulson. I lead the Passive House team at RDH Building Science, and I'm really happy to see you all. It just amazes me how much information we can get in Passive House. We can miss more now than we used to be able to get if we traveled back and forth across the world. This is an inclusive gathering. We welcome people from all Passive House communities. We welcome people interested in electrification and embodied carbon, and we welcome anyone else who's working to accelerate the transformation of our built environment to survive the Anthropocene. So please turn on your cameras. We want to see you. Turn on your microphones just for a toast. We want to make some noise together. And let's raise a glass to the 24th International Passive House Conference, which we heard just a little bit about a few minutes ago.
Cheers. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Just to point out the obvious, that means they've been doing this for 24 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's mute your mics, close that other app you've got open. You don't really need to play a game for the next half hour because we have a great show. We have a video clip from the International Passive House Conference and a fascinating presentation on indoor air quality by Bill Hayward, creator of the Hayward Score. Now, please allow me the privilege of introducing my co-host, Prudence Ferreira.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks, Monty. I'm super happy to be here, as always, every week. This is the highlight of my week. I'm Prudence Ferreira, and I lead the Passive House practice for Morrison Hirschfield. And this is officially my last session from California. Tomorrow, I relocate to the Northeastern US to help implement Passive House and zero carbon projects there. So all you East Coasters, I'm coming. I hope to see you soon. Last week, I gave everyone homework, and if you missed our show last week, I'm going to tell you what the homework was. The homework was to define for yourself why Passive House is climate action and resilience. And if you have kids or kids in your life, to talk to them and get their take on things. And then send a message to one person who's not a part of the Passive House community and tell them why Passive House is climate action and resilience. Make a 30-second video explaining what you and your kids think about this matter, and then to think about how we as a community can create a social media campaign using our little videos to get Passive House more visible to everyone is a critical part of the solutions that we need right now. Now, we're going to revisit that homework in the after hour. So if you haven't finished it yet, you have about 45 minutes to at least think about the first part. All right. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Monty to introduce our special video for tonight.
Okay, well, we'll keep this short. The opening plenary of the 24th International Passive House Conference was Sunday, and one of the presenters was Wolfgang Feist, who needs no introduction. And here's just a little bit of what he had to say about indoor air quality, which is the topic of our next presentation this evening.
Also from my side to this 24th Passive House Conference. My name is Wolfgang Feist, and I'm going to present here on the Passive House. This is not just a contribution. First of all, of course, if I'm sitting in my building, I want to have it healthy. So we want healthy living. And the Passive House can deliver for that. So if you look at the buildings which are not healthy, like these ones, most of the causes for this are moisture problems. We don't want to have that in passive houses, and we won't. Now, how does the passive house standard avoid this? Well, it has a improved insulation. It has reduced thermal bridging. It is really airtight, so that there is no condensation in the gaps. And we have a sufficient ventilation. Ventilation, of course, is very important with respect to the indoor air quality. This is something you can see here. It's a slide which is from a presentation of one of the former Passive House conferences. That was a conference where the German specialist on radon has been talking about the possibility of reducing the amount of radon contamination, of radon activity in our buildings. And what you see is that with the passive house ventilation, the radon activity in the building is as low as it is outside of the house. And you can't really do much better than this. This is also the case, of course, for all the other contaminants which we have in the buildings. In the past half a year, we have all been confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we now know that COVID-19 is also spread with aerosols. The aerosols, these are small particles which are in the air and which can be in the air for quite a long time. It takes about 3 hours to breathe just half of what we have had in before. So it's quite important to have fresh air all the time. And that is exactly what the passive house can deliver. And this is what we can see in schools, for example. Well, of course, we have to make sure that everybody is also wearing a mask, because the big droplets, those ones which might fly just a few meters and might hit your face or hit the surfaces, they of course can't be ventilated out. You have to be protected for them by a mask. But if you are wearing a mask, the aerosol can be avoided by the passive house ventilation, and this is what you see on that slide. So we will reduce the overall chance for getting infected by more than a factor 3. And that means that at the end, the infection will die out because the reproduction rate will be smaller than 1.
Fantastic. So we are going to go into breakout rooms in a moment, but before then, I want to share really fast this image of the schedule for the conference, and I was just madly figuring out the time zone conversions. Monty suggested I do this earlier, and I was not able to. It's been a busy day. But the key information here is that the conference sessions are happening on Wednesdays and Thursdays through the next couple of weeks. As you can see, week 1, week 2, week 3, we are currently in week 1. And the sessions are at 9 a.m. CEST and 5 p.m. CEST, which translates to, for West Coast, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but West Coast, that means midnight for the first session, and 3 a.m. for the folks on the East Coast. But the second session for each day is very friendly to our time zone, and because it hits at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern. Also, all the sessions are recorded, so you can check out all of the content when you register. Okay, so now we're going to move into breakout rooms, and we're going to do 3-minute rapid fire introductions of one another. So I will see you back here in 3 minutes. Enjoy. Got everyone back? Excellent. Hope that was fun. So I'm gonna go straight into some quick announcements and then hand it off. And I will start by sharing the weekend preview. So if you navigate to the Passive House Accelerator website, you can get to this information yourself. Each Monday we publish this Passive House weekend preview, and you can see the wonderful presentation we're about to hear. Also, the latest Passive House podcast. This is with Andrew Peel. This episode. The fact that we've got an exciting component spotlight coming up on Friday, which I'll announce later, and information about the conference. You can get links to register for the International Passive House Conference. Building Energy near NYC is happening right now. You can get links to a bunch of great socials that are put on by our friends and colleagues in this space, including Mark Wiley, who many of you just saw a few moments ago, and then educational stuff that's coming up, including, I wanted to call this out, Monty's class, A Pattern Language from Passive House, is very popular, and there's more classes available both in October, a session in October, as you can see, as well as in November. Also, I'd like to quickly point out for folks, and I think that registration has been a little confusing in the past for this meeting and finding the right Zoom link. But this Zoom link right here, and I'm going to share it in chat. This is the Zoom link that works for all happy hours for anyone. I will, whenever we send this out, a link out to this meeting in email now, it's always the same. And for the foreseeable future, this will be what you can use. So with that, I will hand it off to Prudence.
So, can you guys hear me and see me okay?
Yes.
I got a low bandwidth warning, so hopefully it works out well. I am just so excited to have Bill Hayward on our show tonight. In this world, there are many people earnestly trying to do the right thing, and many of us have been attracted to Passive House for this very reason. Bill is truly one of the kindest, most compassionate people I've come across in my work as a Passive House consultant over the last decade plus. We worked together on his first Passive House in Carmel, California, and started work on his second one, which is now getting close to being complete, which is a deep energy retrofit of an existing house in Pebble Beach. And during the time that we worked together, he taught me such an enormous amount about the importance of indoor air quality. And working with him is probably one of the reasons I became so passionate about hygrothermal modeling, making sure that there's no way we're creating mold or rot risk with our airtight, super insulated Passive House enclosures. Now, because Bill is truly a man with heart who cares about others deeply and doesn't want anyone else to go through the health challenges his family have experienced, he started his ambitious project to raise awareness around indoor air quality and set about researching, assessing, and simulating the common indoor air quality issues that exist in housing stock all around the US's hygrothermal regions of all ages, and correlated modeled results back to what his team was seeing in the field. And with that research and data, he created the Hayward Healthy Home program and scoring system, and has now gathered data on over 78,000 homes across the US, helping those households implement strategies that improve their indoor air quality and therefore their health. So tonight he's going to share his story with us and tell us how we can help create more data that can make a case for Passive House building, providing better indoor air quality, and inform our indoor air quality research and development as we move forward in finding ways to improve Passive House indoor air quality even more. Thank you so much for joining us, Bill.
Prudence, thank you very much. It's a very, very kind introduction. And your question at the beginning, I hope, is the one that I'm going to cover, because it really is, how do we accelerate Passive House through the power of health, in my mind. My wife and I moved by our dream house in Pebble Beach, California, and we move in. It's in Pebble Beach. It's a wet climate. It's not an old house. It was built in 2001. And when the heat starts to run, we feel tired. Noses start to run. Feel exhausted. Complain. Time passes. We're really exhausted. Well, we blame it on the fact that we have a new baby, because my wife's a psychologist. We should know. Of course it's a baby. But by winter, we have these unusual health symptoms. Hives start to show up, sensitivities to things that we were never sensitive before, unusual reactions. Even the dogs had them. And then I couldn't hold a 10-digit phone number in my head long enough to dial it. I became so exhausted I fell asleep in meetings. I couldn't think clearly to run meetings. I began to think I had had a brain injury and I would need to sell my 100-year-old family business to support my family. That's literally how deep we were. Adriana could no longer get pregnant. Our baby had green stuff coming out of her nose all the time. And finally, the doctor said, you should test the house. So we did. And I tested everything. We found a lot of mold in the house. Turns out the builder had taken a lot of shortcuts. There was a lot of moisture intrusion, and it was a damp, wet climate. And internal occupancy was higher than the house was used to. So we know the story, right? Wolfgang Feist just talked about it. Homes accumulate outdoor pollutants 5 times higher. Homes are full of chemicals with which we build, and then we add personal care items and cleaning supplies. So these beautiful homes that we love sometimes become a container of harm instead of our protector. So what do we do about it? We build it tight, as we do in Passive House, and ventilate it right. We can clean it up. We can make the air cleaner. If you change the air, you can change your health. So
I had happened to run a 4-generation company, 100 years old. I've been the chairman of the FSC. And the reason I mention that is because in the FSC, we watched the power of consumer demand transform global markets. And my wife was a doctor, which gave us a particular medical understanding of the situation. And we had this 100-year-old company, so we could afford to do something about it first on behalf of builders. And what we said to ourselves initially is we need to build principles of a healthy home, not complex principles like passive house and living building challenge, but kind of K through 12 to bring builders into the discussion at a simple level. So continuous fresh air, properly sealed and insulated, less toxic material, cleanable surfaces, and healthy home habits. And those can be used in the way the principles of the FSC can to define healthy home. So I want to talk about continuous fresh air. We built the first passive house, Prudence took us through it, to these principles. And we spent 2,000 hours studying the building materials to make sure we had the lowest possible off-gassing materials that we could find. So we were pretty proud of ourselves. When we moved in, we thought, wow, let's run the ventilation, let's run testing equipment. And this is expensive Wolf instruments. The TVOCs ran around 250 in the beginning with ventilation on. But when we turned ventilation off for 2 days, they accumulated to 1,300. And let me tell you, that is a headache-creating environment. That's a difficult environment to be in. But with a Zender HRV, in relation back on, you can see they came back down to really low levels within an hour. Okay, so we lived with these instruments in the house, and they went tick, 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 and my wife really didn't like that. But if the instruments weren't running at a good ventilation rate, those little peaks, which were the daily living, would have grown very high. And in this case, they stay low because the ventilation's high. And by keeping them low, we're reducing the total weight on our body from the toxins and the building materials, moisture and dampness, and other things that affect human health. So we've known this for a long time. For how long have we been saying, I can't think clearly, I just need a little fresh air? Well, as long as we've been in conference rooms and buildings. Fortunately, Harvard studied this. In the cognitive study, which they released 4 years ago, they looked at the air quality in the average office building, and they studied cognition with a 45-minute cognition test, this being the outcome of these categories. And then when they compared that to air quality when it was really high quality, low CO2, under 800, low particles, low VOCs, you could see that cognition improved anywhere between 60 and 260%. Well, that's stunning if we think that the way in which we design our home affects our cognition. I sometimes suggest to architects if they keep designing homes as they do, they'll continue to dumb down their clients. 60 to 260% improvement, also 12% productivity improvement, and 20% improvement to sleep quality, which was measured with wearables. Okay, so that meant I, as an employer, the environment that my people work in the day affects their quality of life at night, and their home affects their ability to function. So we invented Hayward Score, and we went back into my experience at FSC, and we pulled from the quiver of transformation and said, let's create a transformation tool that can identify the health of the house in a number, in the way that the J.D. Power Safety Score for cars does. So if you were to go to haywardscore.com and spend 15 minutes, you would see 50 of 300 total questions. It would ask about where you live. We'd enter a climate zone. We'd look at what your home is made of, how often you run your range hood, do you run the bath fan, how often you shower 10 minutes or longer, where you store your chemicals, do you vacuum, do you have pets, how old's your carpet, everything that has to do with the health of the house. And then we aggregated those in a complex set of algorithms that begin with Wolfie and evolved over 2 years to a description of the home as a working system. And from that, again, free, you get a 5-page report that tells you how to fix your house, how to make it healthy, what your score is, likelihood of it's impacting your health, and it's based on the climate you live in, a climate-specific solution, lo and behold. So consumers love it. When we launched it, they started getting it all over the nation. Today we have 78,000 completed Hayward scores, and you can see they come from where people live, plus a couple of moldy metros like Texas, Florida, and California. 78,000 homes scored, largest database correlating health, symptoms, housing, and occupant habits ever created. And our clients are people who are trying to get access to the health highway, military, home builders, manufacturers, research institutions who want to engage their customers in health. So why is this such a big deal? Dr. Corsi is a very famous IAQ, indoor air quality specialist, and he wrote this up. If you live to be 79, it turns out you spend 69 of your years indoors, hence the 90% statistic, 54 at home, 26 in bed. And bed is very important because this is where our body resets. So if we sleep under assault at night in the master bedroom from dampness, mold, dust mites, bad. It disrupts the body's ability to be healthy. So here's the stuff that you really came to this presentation to see. After 3 years and 78,000 scores, we can publish data we feel confident about. And you can see on the right that the houses in the fourth quartile best score 75. And you can then see self-reported symptoms. And then if you move to the left, the score goes down, second quartile 39, 11 being bad. And you see nearly a doubling of health symptoms. People tell us when they leave the house, these symptoms go away. And in the bottom 25%, they tell us in the morning 2.3 symptoms go away only to return when they come back. This is a stunning thing for doctors to look at. So if there was doubt in the industry that homes affected health, it was probably only because the studies were small. They had 30 homes, 60 homes, maybe 100. Never 78,000 homes. We have revealed the truth about health and housing. Forever, housing, affordability, and health are inseparable. And that changes the whole discussion of passive house and why health matters and why passive house saves health expense. We'll never forget, if you were around, the gas lines in the 70s, and we shall never forget COVID and what's on our elevator button and what's in our air. But most importantly for us, what's in our air, where it comes from and how it gets in our house and how it affects our health. And so I believe we can use the power of health to inspire the market to live in passive houses and demonstrate that. Turns out if you just have a COVID-specific discussion, when houses stay between 40 and 60% humidity, as mine does with an ERV, you're less likely to see a spread of COVID and other things. A lot of hospital studies have laid on that. When you're less exposed to particles and chemicals on a daily basis, particularly particles, you have greater resilience to COVID in general. Wouldn't that be a nice attribute for those of us who live in passive houses? And now that home is the workplace and school is the workplace, and we're at school, at home for school, CO2 in the house becomes a big factor. Volatiles in the house are a big factor. Anxiety, depression, all these things happen in homes with bad air. So my ask of you, we have 78,000 homes. We have a database that empowers comparing houses. If we can get 250 passive house owners to get their Hayward score, it's free, it's confidential. We don't share it, we aggregate it. But we would have a study on passive homes. And I'm confident they would be far to the right of the homes that score 75. My house scores a 95. And at least in preliminary work, we've seen that people in passive houses cook a lot more, show a lot fewer symptoms, a lot healthier, less dust, fewer leaks, probably better quality builders. A lot of things would come out of that. And I would love to help accelerate the movement to build more passive houses by linking passive house to health. We did a quick thing using Hayward score data where we looked at affordable entry-level market force housing and what it would cost to take an affordable house from code to healthy. And we came up with the 12 elemental steps. These are on our website. You asked for the top 5. Ventilation, ventilation, ventilation. 0.5 ACH. We need to be above that 0.3 that we like so much with passive house. And I tell you, you need it just to overcome the off-gassing of chemicals in the first 2 years. An easy, cheap step, plywood, no OSB, no particle board, volatile paint, no foam insulation. For kitchen, induction range and effective kitchen ventilation with makeup air. And makeup air is particularly important in a passive house where there is no extra air. 100% sealing between the garage and the house, and execute a comprehensive dust protocol before occupancy. HEPA vacuum, wipe HEPA vacuum. I came up with the garage protocol after my own experience. I bought a London cab and I put it in my passive house. It's measured at 0.6. And we found that in the garage, we had 5,400 parts per million when the taxi was sitting there, and 11,000 when it had just been driven, and it got in the house. I followed it with theatrical smoke to see how. And then I found from a blood test we did that some of the chemicals were in my bloodstream. So even passive house at 0.6 isn't tight enough for the garage house connection. And I'll just finish by saying something that is so near and dear to my heart. I, like you, was so concerned with sustainability and energy, and I sold sustainability, but I only got 13% of the population of the market. FSC taught me about consumer demand, and health taught me that 60% of the market will come to the table when it's about their health. And so now, if we can make all homes healthy, they become energy efficient, and we have a way to cut 30% of the global carbon footprint. And if all homes were healthy, it would change the demand for toxic chemicals, and that would be good for the planet. And finally, if all homes were healthy, the American public would save $700 billion a year, as we calculated, on healthcare expense. And that money could be used to finance transformation to carbon efficiency.
No.
And that's the end of my message.
Major.
Bill, that is a very strong message. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't know.
I have this sneaking suspicion Sean might have more than a few questions queued up. Sean?
Yes, Scott, I'll just check with you. I think yours was clarified by Prudence, and then we're going to jump to the list. Will start with, so we'll just start with Susan.
Actually, let's start with Scott, because I think Bill is running his ERV differently than we modeled the house he's living in now.
So Bill, my question, and it was based on that first passive house building that you showed, is what was the ventilation rate that you were using, and what would you want to run it at now?
At the time, Prudence and I pushed it a little bit. I think the passive house goal was 0.3, and I was like, let's go to like 0.35. You know, that was a big deal to push it. Once I read the Harvard studies, and the Harvard studies talked about the cognitive gains, we started experimenting with the ERV at 95% of capacity, which sucks a lot of energy, because I wanted to see what the difference was. And it was profound. It was noticeable, particularly in the family. We couldn't keep the CO2 under the levels we wanted at 0.35. It would routinely get over 1,100, 1,200. We wanted to be under 800, ideally in the 650s. And so we're running at about a 0.4. Harvard wants 40 CFM. I do not have that. I don't think you need that in a non-commercial environment. But in the bedroom, we probably have around 34 CFM in the master bedroom right now. And that seems to be working pretty well, given the size of the room.
Good, thank you. That's I guess the other question was, do you have a separate ventilation system, or are you using recirc on your kitchen?
At the time, 2014, we believed that recirc was the ticket, and so I have recirc. And behind the recirc is the panel, so I haven't poked a hole in the wall to tear it out yet. But I have 5 years of testing, and for me, recirc doesn't do it. And once I started to read the Lawrence Berkeley laboratory studies and meet Brett Singer and really measure with my own instruments, every time we cook, the particulate spreads throughout the house pretty heavily, and it's just not a healthy outcome, in my opinion.
And the recirc hoods don't take out the particulates. Is that the concern? Is it the type of filter?
Yeah, even if you put a carbon filtration with zeolite, I mean, you could go to really, really, really high level filtration, but you're still not exhausting enough, and you've got the gases if you're not induction. I think we're much better off exhausting that out of the house and having dampers and makeup there.
Okay, thanks.
Matthew, you're up next.
Hello from New Zealand and the rest of the world. Obviously, it's based on US and Canadian zip codes at the moment. What do we need to do to get it outside those borders?
Well, we have about 100 scores from the UK and a few scores from New Zealand. I simply need to modify the algorithms for the methods of building in New Zealand, which is on our to-do list at some point.
We should talk.
Okay.
All right, well, Bill and Matthew, we'll let you guys connect. Tom Phillips, you're up next.
Oh, great stuff. Thanks for that. I've always wanted to hear more about your program. I actually was born and lived in Monterey for a while, and then in asthma studies, that Central Coast became famous for high rates of childhood asthma. So I'm just wondering if, that's due to the fog or a lot of crawl space problems or all of the above. Have you seen other kinds of crawl space problems in that area?
Prudence will remember this. Crawl space, I think, is just the killer attribute, the air quality degradation chamber and big mistake in building. In Hayward score data, 78,000 scores, it didn't show up as the biggest devil that I thought it was going to be. So that was a bit of a surprise. But certainly crawl spaces accelerate the flow of damp, wet air, and this is a dewy area. So wherever we have damp, wet air and soil microbials combining and getting into the building materials, it definitely impacts health. One other thing about this area, Harvard did a 17-city study, and they looked at how much mold was in 17 cities across the country. PG, California, here, won as the moldiest, second only to the Shenandoah Valley.
Right.
So I prefer not to see crawl spaces or closed crawl spaces. And I think at the end of the day, particularly at passive house level, putting a rat slab down in the crawl space and sealing it is cheaper, more sightly, and easier to do given having to move around earthquake holds to put foundation vents in than actually building a dirt crawl space.
So I may have missed it, but I assumed you fixed your crawl space moisture source.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, great.
Okay, got Peter up next, and then Chi. Peter, are you there?
Hi, Bill. I have a question about what equipment you're using to measure the air quality in terms of particulates, CO2, etc.
Yeah, I've got a couple of wolf sense monitors, gray wolf, a particle counter, and air quality monitors. And then we've also used something called the Instascope, which is about a $30,000 real-time mold monitor that can differentiate between particles and biologicals and mold itself based on a mold library that they created out in Colorado.
What about CO2?
The Wolf Sense is monitoring the CO2. And then I also have a couple of other inexpensive air quality monitors like Aware.
Okay. Thank you.
Some of those less expensive ones are algorithmic based for CO2, so they can't always be trusted on the actual measure.
Excellent, great question. We have Julie next, and then Susan.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really insightful. Given that the FIA standard sort of allows for a more general exhaust in the kitchen, and I think the chat, and you've certainly talked about it, sort of, highlights the issue that we have with kitchen recirc or using a recirc. Did you, beyond the taxi in the garage, did you ever look at the flow of the contaminated air? We try to do a drop in our ceiling, like a cased opening, so that the contaminated air sits in the ceiling and hits the general exhaust fan. Maybe easier than if it would migrate around the house. But did you ever look at the flow of air in the contamination?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? Because I originally thought, well, we got to stick with these recirc fans, and I understand filtration, but as I looked at it and as I watched CO2 in the house, particularly our kitchen's here, we all sit in the kitchen, even with high levels of ventilation, the pool of CO2 starts to rise. Prudence knows the house. The living room's back this way. A lot of air is coming from the living room. The CO2 still swims upstream. It gets out and it moves and it swims upstream. Same thing with the particles. So I have 3 monitors working. I can see how it moves through the house. But once you start cooking, it fills, it spreads. But I think the best measure is if we cook bacon, where does it end up? Right? It always ends up in the box canyon of the house. And that's typically one of the kids' rooms or the upstairs room, even with great ventilation. So if we don't want that particulate ending up in the kids' rooms while they're studying for school or if people are sleeping, we need better kitchen ventilation.
Sorry, when there's a long list of questions. Great stuff. I just unfortunately just missed who I had in the queue. I think
it was
Susan.
me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thanks, Susan. Keep me on track.
yeah. I think one question, and I might have missed it, Bill, thank you very much for this. It was just wonderful. And thanks for staying so calm when all the technical glitches happened. I was just wondering, when did Haworth score? When did you start that to have 78,000 homes? How long has that been going on?
We started the work and applied for the patents in 2014. We now have 4 patents, but we didn't go live until 16 in terms of getting scores. So really 17, 18, 19 were the 3 big years of getting scores, and now we've got scores up through 20. So we have 3 years of patterns. We have seasonality. We can see by state, by location, by whether you have asthma, whether you have old carpet, whether you have crawl spaces, chemical sensitivities. We've got a great study going with the University of Texas in San Antonio on chemical sensitivities with Claudia Miller, which is a big issue. We can even see that something like 8% of people are triggered by new construction, which if you're a builder, that's a good thing to know, that you have a potential for 8% of your customers to be triggered by chemicals from new construction.
Do you emphasize then to have low VOC materials as a start?
Very much so,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
If
you think about, we spent 2,000 hours researching the material. We thought we got the lowest possible. What we discovered is the truth is impossible to find. And so no matter how good a job you do, there's still going to be more than you want. And ventilation is the only way to minimize the exposure to the occupants.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Last question, sorry, Sean. It was about the cognitive scores. Do you know if there have been some research in the cognitive scores of people living in passive houses? How they compare to typical housing?
You know, I know from my own experience, it's great. When you're in fresh air, you feel better. And so I know what the quality of my air is here using instruments, and I can compare it to the quality of the Harvard study or the work Google's doing in their conference rooms or Facebook is doing. And there's definitely a cognitive and productivity increase.
Thank you, Bill.
Susan, great questions. Totally okay with all that stuff. Bill, it'd be neat to see the test of a new car, because we always talk about the new car smell, right? Be interesting to see the VOCs in that. Lois, we have you next.
Hey, Bill. It's nice to meet you. This is a great body of samples. My specialty is large scale projects, in particular multifamily, highly dense projects. And I was wondering what percentage of your body of study is actually from multifamily units.
So 60% of our users are owners, 40% are renters, about 15% are multifamily.
16%.
And I think about 4% are military.
So what we find is that, we're talking about that proper ACH, right? That's good for a home. When you get into multifamily, you have 400, 500 square feet of apartment. Few people living in there, one bedroom, one bathroom, one kitchen. And your 45 CFM at minimum code is actually almost 1 air change per hour. Do you have any data on how well that minimum ventilation rate is actually ventilating these apartments? Or do we, are you finding 2 is needed or 0.5 is needed? Because we do know that overly dry air from too much ventilation is actually not good for the occupants either.
Yeah, I'm sure that is too much air. I mean, it might be fresh, but it's probably pressurizing or depressurizing another unit. It's unfortunate
it's balanced because they're passive house projects, right? So we're doing the 45 CFM, 20 from the kitchen, 25 from the bathroom, 20 from the bathroom, 20 from the kitchen, but then it's getting supplied to the bedrooms and the living rooms. So it's balanced, but it's still a very high rate of ventilation.
So I guess that, as I think about that, so being at home has been very interesting because I was in my wife's office. Now I'm in my kids' room. But in my wife's office, which has two Zender vents and about 30 CFM, it's very tiny. When I sit in there for any length of time with the windows closed and door closed, it gets over 1,000 in that tiny office. So even though there's a lot of CFM coming in, that overcomes my own individual production of CO2. I have to open a window. If the room were about twice that size, I wouldn't see the impact, because this room has the same number of vents and I don't see the impact. So in that respect, I think there's some more studies to do where we can put IAQ instruments in those units and watch where the CO2 is going.
Is the door closed while you're in there working?
When I close the door because the kids are yelling, yes, and that's where I was having a CO2 problem. And I started to get a headache at 700. I can recognize it. 1,000, I start to get sleepy.
We have thousands and thousands of multifamily units in high-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise apartments. I would love to try and work out something where we can put some numbers to this, right? And the best way to do it, because I don't think anybody really knows that you're looking at 1 air change per hour, which is high for passive house, but is it actually high for good indoor air quality? And I would really like to know the answer to that question.
Here, here.
I'd love to get a few cheap instruments in there and monitor it, and then I think we could make a quick decision.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to announce next week's happy hour guest, but first I want to share about what a great event that's happening on Friday, and that's our Passive House Component Spotlight that's going to be focused on UPVC window options for multifamily and budget buildings. So this is about diving into the details about high performance and budget conscious solutions with Florian Spear and Evan Anderson from Zola Windows. And I will share a link to that now. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, because all of the work that we do at the Passive House Accelerator is thanks to the support from these folks, some very generous support. So Baxt Ingwe Architects, Mitsubishi Electric, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows are all founding sponsors of the Accelerator. NYSERDA is a stakeholder partner, and our patron sponsors are Morrison, Hirschfield, and 475 High Performance Building Supply, and Partel. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And now, drum roll please, we have next week's presentation is near and dear to my heart. This is Pax Futura, which is Seattle's first passive house apartment building. And this is a presentation by Brandon Nicholson and Sloan Ritchie, the architect and the builder developer of this cool project. So with that, I'll hand it off.
And I'm super excited to roll into the after hour and keep on with the questions and find out more. This chat is really, really getting me lively. I hope that you all enjoyed it. And yeah, Monty.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I really invite everybody to follow up on Bill's request that, as we know, passive house projects, please have the occupants try to fill out some of the same surveys so we can get some comparative data. And please don't skew them. Just say, hey, fill this out to the best of your ability. We're not trying to rig this. We're trying to see if there's actually a delta that we can be tracked through things like Hayward score. So if you know anybody who's an occupant, you think they'd be worth giving that a little bit of time, maybe you can tell us about how much time it takes to do the survey, Bill. Would urge you to just take a few minutes this week and send the link and encourage somebody to fill it out.